Some roads lead to destinations, others lead to something far worse. Rohan gripped the steering wheel tighter as his car sliced through the fog-shrouded road. The empty highway stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the thick forest that lined both sides. His temples throbbed from the whiskey he had consumed earlier, but the alcohol did little to numb the suffocating weight pressing against his chest. His life was falling apart. His marriage was over. His business had crumbled, and the debt collectors were circling like vultures. He had lost everything. As he drove aimlessly into the night, he felt like a ghost of himself, adrift, unwanted, forgotten. The road curled through the dense wilderness, and the mist seemed to pulse as if alive. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, an absence of sound that made his skin prickle. Then, through the shifting fog, a figure appeared. A woman. She stood on the roadside, her form barely visible in the dim glow of his headlights. Long, tangled hair cascaded down her back, and her pale skin almost glowed in the darkness. She was barefoot, wearing a dress that clung to her thin frame, unmoving despite the cold wind. Something about her presence sent an uneasy ripple through his spine. Yet, without thinking, he slowed the car to a stop. There was something wrong. No one should be out here alone, not at this hour. She stepped forward, her movements eerily fluid, and slid into the passenger seat without a sound. The scent of damp earth and something metallic clung to her. As he pulled back onto the road, the temperature in the car dropped noticeably. His breath fogged up the windshield, and a cold shiver slithered down his spine. He tried to focus on driving, but the silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. The woman sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead. He stole a glance at her. She was too pale, her lips slightly parted, as if whispering something under her breath. Her presence felt wrong. The air inside the car grew heavier. A sense of dread curled around his chest, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He turned to ask her where she was headed, but something stopped him. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. His hands were shaking. His pulse quickened as realization crept in. She cast no reflection in the rearview mirror. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned his head slightly, expecting her to be gone. But no, she was still there, sitting perfectly still. His throat went dry. The road ahead blurred as fear twisted through his gut. A chilling whisper broke the silence, a question, spoken so softly it barely touched the air. She knew his name. A cold wave crashed over him. He hadn't told her. He hadn't spoken a word. The blood drained from his face as the weight of her presence bore down on him. Something ancient and malevolent lurked beneath her quiet demeanor. Memories flashed through his mind. The bar, his drunken, hopeless mutterings. He had whispered to himself that he wanted to disappear, to leave his miserable life behind. He had cursed his existence, wished for an escape, pleaded for a second chance. The woman shifted in her seat, turning her head toward him for the first time. His stomach dropped. Her face was wrong. Pale, yes, but stretched unnaturally. Her lips curling into a slow, wide grin that sent ice through his veins. Her eyes, once dull, now gleamed with something hungry, something hollow. The road ahead seemed to warp, the trees blurred, the mist thickened, and suddenly, the world outside was gone. There was no road, no forest, only darkness, stretching infinitely. Panic surged through his chest. He slammed the brakes, but the car didn't stop. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind screaming at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The woman leaned closer, her icy breath brushing against his ear. The scent of decay filled his nostrils. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The dashboard lights flickered. The air inside the car grew impossibly cold, seeping into his bones. His fingers were stiff, his body locked in place. Then, the whisper returned, a voice that no longer belonged to a woman, but to something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting. He had asked for an escape, and now he had it. The weight of her words crushed his mind. This wasn't a dream, wasn't a drunken hallucination. He had stepped into something he wasn't meant to understand, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of reality, waiting for lost souls like him to slip through the cracks. The darkness outside pulsed, alive, shifting like a living thing. Shadows moved within it, shapes barely visible, whispering, reaching. His own reflection in the windshield began to distort, his face stretching, his skin paling, his features twisted into something unrecognizable. Terror paralyzed him. His hands no longer felt like his own. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, his body trembling violently. He clawed at the door, at the window, but the car was no longer a car. It was something else entirely. A prison, a passage, a gateway. The woman, or whatever she was, watched him, unblinking. Her smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp, too long. Then, everything went silent. The car was found the next morning, parked on the side of the road, its engine still running. The driver's seat was empty. No footprints led away from it. No signs of struggle, no explanation. Just an abandoned vehicle. Its owner vanished without a trace. Locals spoke of the road, how travelers sometimes disappeared, how strange things happened in the dead of night. Some whispered about the woman who appeared when the mist was thickest, standing by the roadside, waiting, always waiting. And those who stopped never came back. They said if you listen closely on that road, just before dawn, you can hear a whisper carried by the wind, a voice, soft, distant, calling out from the void, a voice that was once human, a voice that had begged for escape and found it.